Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, here with some more FPL content. As always, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. The question on my mind, and on many FPL managers' mind at the moment, is Haaland essential? So, as you can see on the screen there, his form has massively tailed off over the past few weeks. When he's priced at 15.4 million, you'd obviously expect goals, returns on a regular basis. And whilst it might be too much to ask for massive double digit hauls, as we saw at the start of the season, the fact he's only had one fantasy return now in the past four FPL games is somewhat problematic. So for those that have a wild card at hand, no doubt even you're questioning whether to retain Haaland in the subsequent game weeks. So I'll have a look at his numbers. I'll also look at alternative options that are available as well, whilst I construct a no Haaland mock draft. So before I get into it, just want to also remind you of Haaland. He's not having the worst season in the world at the moment. Clearly, he's had 11 goals in 10 matches, and his overall record for Man City is outstanding, 104 goals in 112 games. So obviously, it's a temporary issue for him at this moment in time. I'd argue that actually it may not be him necessarily, but it's a sheer number of injuries that Man City have at the moment and form issues with other players. For example, KDB isn't available. Foden has not really been hitting the high notes since he got reintroduced to the team post Euros. So it really could be a case of that the other players need to get back into the swing of things before Haaland can deliver those double digit hauls once again. So that's just worth factoring in as well. And another thing that I do want to really highlight as well, often we just focus too much on individual player stats and upcoming games and just leave it at that. Reminder that Liverpool are at the top of the table, and those that basically had that choice between picking Haaland or Salah, or basically going for both. It's clear that those that did have Mohamed Salah, this was a big debate during pre-season as well, that ultimately those in that camp are doing significantly better than the no Salah camp. Diaz, to some extent, was covering those no Salah drafts for a while, but then minutes became an issue for him as well, and his form has dipped. Ultimately, Liverpool have won 8 games out of 10 so far. And with Man City, considering all the injury issues they've had, 7 wins out of 10, only 2 points behind Liverpool, so no doubt plenty of time to catch up. You've got Nottingham Forest, surprisingly up in third. A lot of debate about them pre-season as well, with that generous run of games, and ultimately they capitalised on it. Only one defeat in 10 games, so those that invested in a Forest defensive asset, or ultimately Chris Wood, you're benefiting massively as well. No doubt would have a top 100k rank if you have a Forest asset, Mohamed Salah, and some of the other bandwagon players as well. You've got Chelsea fourth. Again, Palmer has played a big part in them being in that top four slot early on. And the other debate is having Salah, Palmer, and Haaland during this early part of the season has been beneficial as well. So fair play if you've managed to do that. And then you've got Arsenal down in fifth, surprisingly, haven't won half their matches this season. So this is a massive downturn from the previous 2 seasons. And with them, their defense was so reliable over the past 12 months, and it's hit the buffers somewhat. Saka, you could say, has been not, I wouldn't really even call it mixed form. On the whole, he's been fairly consistent, but he's also hit, well, some problematic matches at times as well. Injury has been an issue. Got Aston Villa in sixth, and even if it's not Watkins who's delivering, you've got Morgan Rogers, who's a standout player, and you've got Spurs in seventh, but with them had a slow start to the season, mixed form of late as well, but no doubt they'll pick it up in their upcoming games. Brighton in eighth, who really have seen this renaissance of Danny Welbeck, who's massively helped them with those points. Bournemouth up in ninth with their attacking play. Newcastle surprisingly in 10th. Like Forest, had a generous run of opening games, didn't really capitalise on them as you'd expect. Surprise win against Arsenal has elevated them to 10th, so one win in their past 5 games. It'll be interesting to see if they can basically kick off from here, or if that was basically a one-off. You've got Brentford in 11th, and again with them, may not be keeping clean sheets, winning lots of games, but they're scoring quite a few goals. Got Fulham there in 12th, who've kind of nosedived of late, but no doubt with them, attacking prowess is on show. United have had a horrible start to the season. I think their worst start since the 86-87 season. New manager will take over shortly, and no doubt we'll see a new manager bounce. But with them, 1 win in 5, so massively underperforming. You got West Ham. With them, had a patchy start to the season, 2 wins in their past 5. So with them and the class that they have, no doubt they can pick things up. And you've got Leicester, who are down in 15th, but scoring a healthy number of goals. With Everton, albeit they've only lost 1 in their past 5, their form has been patchy, and you've got a massive disappointment with Crystal Palace, who obviously had a fantastic 23-24 season, sold a few key players, and have only now won just that 1 game in their past 10 during this season, so hovering above the relegation zone. No massive surprises with Ipswich and Southampton in the relegation zone. Then you've got Wolverhampton in last place, but had those very difficult opening games, and they've now seen a turn in their fixtures, so could potentially be one of those teams that do benefit. And talking of fixtures, we can see that Arsenal in particular have got this generous run of games coming up between now and the festive fixture rush. Got Villa, who also have this upturn in games as well. Same with Bournemouth and Brentford, who've had a very generous run. It's going to get a bit more mixed and trickier for them as they enter the festive fixture rush period. Brighton, who've had a few tricky games, they're going to enter green block territory shortly. Same with Chelsea as well. Healthy type of games available for them during this upcoming period in the festive fixture rush. Bit more mixed for Crystal Palace. Everton, who've had that generous fixture run, really need to capitalise on it because their festive fixture rush is a lot more trickier. Similar situation for Fulham, with Ipswich, had a generous run of green block games. Still the case up until the festive fixture rush. Exactly the same situation with Leicester. Those red block games are just around the corner. Liverpool, who've top of the league, but have got these difficult games coming up as well with Aston Villa, Man City, Newcastle, the Merseyside derby, and also Tottenham at the London Stadium. It will be interesting to see if they can maintain that form and momentum going forwards. Got Man City, who have got those tricky games coming up from their side. And this is where this debate about Haaland, whether he's essential or if we can get away with him for a few of the games ahead, basically becomes a big question. So if you've got a wild card, no doubt you can experiment without him. And I'm going to create that mock draft for you in terms of the players that are available. And even if you don't have a wild card, let's say you've got 2 free transfers, you might be tempted to transfer him out and potentially then bring him in once he shows some form once again. Got United, who desperately need that new manager bounce, who have those green block games coming up. Newcastle, fixture turn potentially around the corner for them, albeit you've got a few tricky games there as well. Forest, who've had that uber generous run of green block games, it's going to get trickier for them in the matches ahead. I think really apart from Ipswich at home, you'd really question whether you're going to even have one, let alone multiple Forest players, despite them being in 3rd place. Southampton, red block games, but of course you're not going to rely on them for starters. Spurs, the fixtures, I was going to say they're mixed, but at the same time, very generous green block games with a few of those red games. But we know what Spurs can do in some of those red block games with seasons gone by. West Ham fixtures are going to turn for them in the matches ahead, albeit 2 red block games in the next 8 or 9 outings. And then we've talked about Wolves and their poor form. They really need to capitalise on the upcoming matches, some very generous games between now and the festive fixture rush. So, with all of that said, I'm going to construct this draft now on players that I think definitely are worth considering in a no Haaland draft. And with that in mind, of course, there'll be some very obvious picks that we are going to get in here. And we'll also put in a few differentials as well where possible. And again, every team value situation will be different right now. So I might be able to fit these players in. You may not be able to, but just giving you an illustration on what's available with a no Haaland draft. So look, let's not beat around the bush. Mohamed Salah, in he comes. And yep, you want Cole Palmer as well in this draft. Brian Mbumo, in he comes as well, so fairly straightforward. We can also get in Bukayo Saka with that generous fixture turn coming up for Arsenal. So gone very heavy on the midfield. So what I'm going to try and do is have a very balanced team. Yep, I will probably have 1 or 2 4.0s, but it is going to be midfield heavy, considering that there's not going to be basically Haaland. I did want to fit Foden into this draft as a cover for not having Haaland, but his form has been very problematic. His minutes have also been very problematic as well. Just as a reminder, just bringing them on screen here, we can see that Foden is 14 points in the first 10 games. And it's just, yeah, minutes wise, he's finally starting matches. But in terms of fantasy returns, that's what one fantasy return since game week 1. And it's just not good enough. So I can't justify having him, especially with those trickier fixtures. In terms of the Man City cover, even though they're not really keeping clean sheets, I would want to have Gvardiol. I don't want to have 0 Man City coverage in my team. So in he comes. And in terms of the forwards, again, remind yourselves of that table as we saw it. And looking at the alternatives, there are quite a few cheap options. I've got Palmer, so can't really justify having Jackson unless I make the defense super cheap, so I won't pick him. Danny Welbeck, who I've obviously mentioned and highlighted in the form of his life at the moment, could even get an England call up at this rate for the November internationals if he can carry it on. So I think he's someone I do want, especially with Brighton's fixtures turning fairly shortly. And in terms of the other players, I've only got Watkins, but the form hasn't been that great of late. That's what, 1 goal in the past 4 games. I can't justify having him, but I am going to get Aston Villa cover for sure as their fixtures take a turn. So the real only option is Morgan Rogers at 5.4 million, albeit yet yellow flagged at the time of recording. But from the initial reports after the match on Sunday, he should hopefully be fine. And of course, we'll get further indications during the midweek Champions League games. So midfield as a whole looks fairly solid there. I wouldn't really want to bench Morgan Rogers, but then he's a sub 1 option as well if for some of the trickier games. So Welbeck, again, home to Man City, so somewhat tricky in that match, but again, looking for the long haul. And that's the midfield lineup that is now complete in this mock no Haaland draft. And then again, looking at the other forwards, Cunha, who actually has been in reasonable form considering how bad Wolves have played this season. We can see that pretty much every other game he is picking up a fancy return. especially with those red block games when you've got like the likes of, okay, he didn't score against Man City or Liverpool, but then the other games, which are more reasonable, he was scoring. So I think it's fair to say Cunha is definitely a player that I need to have in this upside draft. His ownership as well is considerably low. Just show you there, 6.4%. So going to pick another forward as well. Already sang the praises of Forest. Wouldn't really pick a Forest defender now. I think I've probably missed the boat on that front in this mock draft with the fixtures getting trickier. 20% owned Chris Wood, 6.5 million. So in he comes as well. So the good thing here is that it's a very balanced and heavy front eight. And of course, you've got Liverpool away for Rodgers, Man City at home for Brighton. You know, you could dovetail accordingly in terms of who you'd bench in this situation. But you're looking at a flexible 3-5-2, 3-4-3 formation with this no Haaland draft. So coming on to the defence now, of course, by not having Haaland, lots of funds are available. So yes, I'm going to go for Trent Alexander-Arnold in this mock draft. And as a reminder, I've already used my wild card, but just an indication for those that still have it at hand. And I've got 3 free transfers, so I could even, with 2 transfers, get rid of Haaland if I really wanted to, and then potentially get him back in after a few game weeks if he's able to show some form once again. So I think that fairly content with there. Spurs cover, I think, is definitely worth considering, but the issue I've got with them is that they're not keeping clean sheets at the moment. Pedro Porro is high on the radar, no doubt. And in terms of the other assets, Son could be an option potentially, albeit, you know, that's fitness permitting. Then you've got Johnson, you've got Maddison as well. I really, there's not like a sole player, like a talisman who I could just pinpoint from Spurs. So who could I get? Yeah, can't really justify any Spurs attacker at the moment, despite the generous games. It would have been Pedro Porro to fill one of these defensive berths. And just having a look here, 22.2 million with 5 places to fill. So I've already mentioned Wolves. I think one player who is basically a cheat code for them, and albeit he didn't keep a clean sheet and didn't get a fantasy return despite his returns of late. I think Ryan Ait-Nouri is a cheat code in many respects, so he has to come in. Very lively in that Saturday game, so in he comes. Again, really running out of funds here, 17.6 with 4 to fill. Going to need some 4.0 defenders as fodder. So the one defender that does come to mind who is 4.0, and it's a bit of a reluctant one, but it is X-Min's safe. And if I just confirm it now, so there we go. Minutes played for defenders. Bednarak, I think he's played every single minute practically for Southampton this season, albeit 10 minutes subbed off early in that first game week, picking him in as a sub 3 player. So you've got that peace of mind that there are some minutes that are being clocked up there, albeit hopefully not too many points. So 13.6 million. So I've got an option here where I could go for Pedro Porro, or I could go for a premium goalkeeper. So I did mention that Arsenal's fixtures are taking a positive turn. So I do want entry into the Arsenal defence. So I think David Raya will be an option, but I'm going to do a almost quick alteration to see what would happen if we had Porro instead. So in this situation, David Raya is the starting goalkeeper. I need a 4.0 goalkeeper, and at the moment, it seems as if Fabianski is a starter for West Ham. We can see that he's now started 2 of the previous games. Again, don't really care about West Ham's fixtures. So he is the fodder player there. And then 4.0 exactly left. So I need another 4.0 defender. And looking at the players that are available, would really have to be like an Ipswich player. And Greaves is red flagged. It's really O'Shea who I can basically pick. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he wasn't starting initially, but he has pretty much started every game from game week 4 onwards. So in he comes as, again, sub 2, sub 3 option. And just looking at the budget there, max it out with my team, exactly 0 on the dot. So with this, very balanced power front 8 without Haaland. And they got those 2 premium defenders as well as a premium goalkeeper as well. Now, I did say that I could have an option here with Porro. So going to Spurs, just seeing 5.5 million. That leaves me with a tricky situation here. So I do need a goalkeeper that's at least 4.5 million. So goalkeepers, let's just see who's available. I think Henderson could be that goalkeeper I could get here. So 0.3 short now. And just seeing what else I could do here. I would want Gvardiol. Thinks could probably get away with not having Trent, 6.7 million. Let's look at the defenders. So let's look at transfers in by, well, let's look at points actually. So we've got Van Dijk, could be an option. Yeah, there aren't really many premium defenders I'd consider here. Robertson, is he even starting as much? His minutes have been somewhat curtailed of late, so I wouldn't really get him. Probably be Van Dijk in fairness. So let's get Virgil van Dijk in. And then I actually could then have a rotating goalkeeping situation. So going to goalkeepers, 4.6 million maximum. We've got Ramsdale, I think could be an option here. Let's get him in. Got Flecken, but not really been a clean sheet merchant this season at all. Yeah, there aren't many other options. To be fair, you've got Johnston, but I think it's Sarr who's been starting, so can't pick him. Let's just check. Yeah, he's not started of late. So yeah, the alternative to the draft I just showed there is Pedro Porro would be the starting defender alongside Virgil van Dijk and Gvardiol. And then you've got this rotation combo of Ramsdale and Henderson. Not even looked at the rotation for Southampton and Crystal Palace. But if I just switch here, so Southampton have Wolves, and then they've got like 5 red block games. And then Crystal Palace got Fulham. Okay, then got Aston Villa and Newcastle. So, and then Man City as well. So, yeah, some bit of rotation, but it's not really a long-term hold. So as we can see, plenty of options available without having to rely on Haaland. My personal take is that I wouldn't really want to sell him, but it's a potential option to unlock funds. And if you are going to sell him temporarily, now is the time to do it, especially considering what Man City's fixtures are and the matches they've got at hand. So Brighton away, Tottenham at home, Liverpool away. I think Forest at home should almost be a light red game, considering that they've had a really good start to the season. So for 3 or 4 games, you could almost get away with not having Haaland. And if you are on a wild card and you get rid of him, you can have a very balanced team, as I've demonstrated. And then you've got the peace of mind that you can basically build up on the free transfers. and then eventually buy him back once he shows some form. So, yeah, he's not the be all or end all. I know last season, I think his ownership was hitting like 80 to 90%. It's about 70-ish percent overall at the moment. So, yeah, it's definitely food for thought. But let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you content with having this Haaland, who's not hitting those double-digit notes of late? Have you got enough funds available? I mean, ultimately, as a reminder, 15.4 million, and at that price, you've got the likes of Danny Welbeck, who costs basically just over a third of that price, who's pretty much outscoring him over the past few game weeks, and also the likes of Chris Wood. So you just need to ultimately weigh out if that's really worth it. And if you don't have Haaland, what are the alternatives at hand? So my conclusion is that definitely upside in temporarily selling him until he rediscovers his form, but it's really for those that are primarily chasing. If you're well outside the top 1 million at the moment and you've got a few free transfers available, or you've got your wild card at hand, you can definitely consider that charge without having him. But with Haaland in particular, I don't think he really has this record of going weeks on end without scoring. Ultimately, he will discover that form fairly soon, and he might even ultimately score in his next few games. But it's a case of, has he got that form to be back in double-digit mode once again from an FPL perspective? As always, if you're able to like, share, and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. Take care and all the best.